Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like I've got a whole bunch of stuff lined up here. I really, really, really tried to take the mess that was in my head, put it on. Like I tried through at least 4 mornings in a row, just kind of like trying to make sense of what was in my head. Um, and so initially, I'll just start with this. We know that there's a first and a second Passover, but I was kind of rereading the instructions there. And in Numbers chapter 9, in the 10th verse, it says that speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any one of you or your prosperity is unclean because of a corpse or is far away on a journey, you must still keep the Lord's Passover on the 14th day of the second month. Okay. And the reason why this is significant is because in my mind, I was like, well, you were maybe out of Jerusalem and you weren't able to get back on time. And then but you would observe second Passover in Jerusalem. Like I never realized that you're actually commanded to observe second Passover even if you can't get back to the homeland. In other words,
Wow.
wherever you are,
Mm,
wherever you are, second Passover has been the dominant Passover since because for the 10 scattered tribes of Israel, they had never come back to the homeland. And
mm,
so when you're looking at the 10 scattered tribes that we're a part of, we actually are commanded to observe second Passover, making second Passover really the feast we need to be looking at prophetically if there was to be a prophetic fulfillment
mm,
um, here at the end. And so then the question becomes, well, is there a prophetic type and shadow or fulfillment that would play out, over the next, through the end times eschatology and the way it kind of lines up. And that's kind of like where my study kind of started. And so I took a look at what happened during the Passover. Well, we know the story and we know how Jesus fulfilled it, but going back to Egypt, what was interesting is that um, and you read about it, you don't read about it during the Exodus, but you read about it actually in Numbers, and I'll go to Numbers 8. He says that all the firstborn among the children of Israel are mine, both man and beast. He says, on that day I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. I sanctified them to myself. So, what happened also during the Passover, when at midnight, when the angel and the destroyer went out and God punished Egypt, right? He also, that is the moment in time when he said he sanctified all of the firstborn to himself. So there's a very big significance with Passover in terms of him acquiring the rights, spiritually speaking, to his inheritance. Because God says, my inheritance is the people. And so the inheritance, that point of like spiritual, whatever authority he got when that went down, however that works, but he says, that is when I sanctified them to myself at that on that day in that moment, right? So, and it's significant because they actually left, like the word says that they were in Egypt for 430 years and they left on the day they went in. Okay, so I
mm.
can grab the scripture for that. That is Exodus 12:41. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years on that very same day. So we know the Passover was on the 14th to the 15th, right? That's the
Yeah.
Passover night. So on the 15th, they left. So on the same day they went in, they left. All
Wow.
right. And at midnight, as soon as they hit, the clock hits 12, at midnight, the angel of death comes in, right? And takes care of business, so to speak. So what did he do? What happened on that night? And I know your wheels are going in terms of prophetic fulfillments and what does this mean in the end time scenario? But what happened on that night? So, and I'm just going to read it real quick. Two things happened on that night. Okay. And I've always picked up on the first, and I never really picked up on the second. So I'm just going to find the verse here, right? So two things happened. So Exodus 12, okay? Exodus 12:12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Okay, that's the first thing that happened. So the striking of the firstborn. Then he says, and against
Ooh.
all the gods of Egypt. I will execute judgment. So on
Mm.
the same night, we have judgment and the God acquiring the inheritance of the rights to his inheritance on that same night, right? And so prophetically speaking, right, we have a second Exodus that's coming. We read about that in Jeremiah. So I'll just touch on this verse real quick. And sorry if I'm going fast, but
No, it's great,
I have
bro.
so much in
Killing
my
it.
head about this. Yeah, so
Great.
um,
Bro, this is
I
amazing.
think it's I.
I never noticed
Yeah,
12:12 where it's you just read that he's going to take the firstborn, but then he's going to strike the gods of Egypt. So like the firstborn is
right.
the physical realm, and then the striking the gods of Egypt, God smites the principalities and powers of wickedness in the heavenly places. Just
Wow.
boom,
Yeah.
executing judgment.
Something something
Amen.
on that day is it's a very significant day in the end times as well because Isaiah 11, this is where we read about um the second Exodus. So, it's not a mystery, it's in the Bible, it's going to happen, right? So it says in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. What is the root of Jesse, right? It's the line of David. Okay. There
Yeah.
shall be a root of Jesse who shall stand as a banner to the people, right? For the Gentiles shall seek him, right? And his resting place shall be glorious. It says, in
Amen.
that it shall come to pass in that day, the Lord shall set his hand again
Mhm.
for the second time to recover the remnant of his people,
Mhm.
right? And who are left. And so when you continue reading this chapter, it talks about how he's going to gather them from the four corners of the earth. Okay. So this time they're not coming out of Egypt, they're coming out of the four corners of the earth. Starting to sound a
Wow.
lot like Matthew 24, right? But it's speaking
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of types and patterns and shadows. It really is giving us the idea of saying, hey, man, take a look at the Exodus, take a look at the Passover. Now, we established at the beginning that we're to look at the second Passover. Why the second Passover? Well, the second Passover happens in the second month, right? What else happened in the second month? As in the days
Noah's.
of Noah.
Oh, Noah's Ark. Yeah. Wow.
As in the days of Noah. So what I would be anticipating here is that when we go back to the promise given to Abraham, which has yet to be fulfilled, it's very clear that Egypt was a 430-year affair. Abraham's prophecy was a 400-year affair. Okay. So when we look at the fulfillment of that and how that's going to come to fruition, I think that looking at that 15th day of the first month, or in our case, the second month, is a very, very would be a high watch date for that to be fulfilled. And it only comes after. And I think that really is the key understanding that it comes after the 400 years is complete, not before. And I've looked high and low and read through the history, trying to figure out, hey, when did that 400 years begins? And the best that I can come up with was, 1620 to 1630. So I've got a 10-year window that God could have potentially pushed the start button to say, let's start this 400 years. But one thing's for sure is that when they come out, what happens? The gods of Egypt will be punished, right? And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go take a quick look at Colossians.
Yeah.
Um, hold on a second. Is it
Man, there's so
Colossians?
much meat wrapped up in Colossians.
I'm sorry. It's Corinthians. You can do
Oh.
Colossians anytime. So just playing with you there. So First Corinthians 15 gives us the order of things, right? The order of
Yeah.
things. So he says, but Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits to those who have fallen asleep. All right. But each one in his own order. So watch the order here. The very first thing, the very first of the order is Christ, the first fruits.
Okay.
Okay. Christ, singular, the first fruits, plural. Okay.
Amen.
That's the first one to take place. The second one afterward, those who are Christ's at his coming. Okay. The coming of the Son of Man. Then comes, right? Then the end comes. So in Matthew 24, it says that the end of the age happens once the gospel has been preached to every tribe, nation, and tongue. Okay. So these first two here, Christ's first fruits, and afterwards those who are Christ that is coming, precede the end. Okay. At the end, what happens? Step 3, he delivers the kingdom of God, the Father, when he puts an end to rule and authority and power, the gods of Egypt. Okay. The gods of
Yes.
Egypt. He must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. So God reigns until he puts the enemies under his feet. And then that's when the millennial kingdom begins at the end of 400 years. So, and just speaking of the order of things we read about in Corinthians, there's a first fruits, right? There's the second coming of Christ, and then there's God making a finality to the principalities and powers ruling this world. So to give the kingdom unto his son, and that's the order of things. So what is the first fruits? Well, the first fruits, it's kind of like the theory of the firstborn. It's not something that just happened one time. The first fruits is not a one-time event that just happened. It's actually there's first fruits since Christ resurrected. There's been first fruits. The first fruits is a part of the harvest, right? We talk about first fruits. We look at the wheat harvest, right? Every year there's a wheat harvest. Every year there's first fruits. So first fruits is it's a how would I put it? It's like it's a
Continual.
well, you're either a first fruit or you're part of the main harvest, and I don't know what the qualifiers are. I did dig in, I did dive a little deeper there. I think I know, but I'm not going to touch on it this evening. But the first fruits is the first thing. So when do we see the first fruits show up in the book of the Revelation? It's in Revelations 14. So in Revelations 14, we see 104,000 standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion.
Amen.
And the question is asked, who are they? And the answer is, these are the first fruits caught up to God and to his throne. So there's actually a moment at the end of time, right, where we see step 1 in the order of things in Corinthians happening, the first fruits. Okay. So how does this relate to the Passover? Okay. The Passover, there are first fruits offered during the Passover. And in fact, it was during the Passover that the Levitical priesthood was offered unto the Lord. When you go back into the book of Numbers, the Levitical priesthood, all 12 tribes surrounded them. They laid hands on them, and they offered the Levitical priesthood as a sweet aroma unto the Lord around the time of Passover. It was between the 12th and the 14th day. So it's very interesting that we're waiting for a fulfillment on a Passover. We know that there's first fruits that identify themselves during the Revelation, and we know that the Levitical priesthood of old was offered unto the Lord around the Passover time frame. So there's a lot of I know I'm going super quick here,
No,
but
it's good.
there's something here. There's something here, and specifically at the second Passover time frame, because we're away, we're on a long journey. Right? We're not in the land. We're not back yet. We haven't been brought back yet. So we're actually commanded to observe the second Passover. Right? So interesting.
When is second Passover this year?
Well, again, the calendar that you follow. So let me pull it up.
Yeah, let's look at all 3.
Sure.
I'm telling you, bro, we're gonna make a calendar called the Tessier calendar, and it's gonna have all the dates of all 3 and the solar sign and everything. And the
I usually have this top of mind, but I haven't been on it in a little while.
Yeah.
Just really depends on the calendar that you follow. Like there's some Torah calendars that started way back in March, and their second Passover would have already happened. Okay. But if we're looking at next month, it would be
22nd.
next month is the 14th, the 22nd to 20, so 23rd to the 24th, but the 22nd evening.
The 24th.
Okay, that's good to know.
And May 18th, I think it was the 40-day marker for after that eclipse, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you said it's when
And that would be the resurrection.
Ah. Huh.
You've got 14. Okay, so here's another thing that's just a total sidebar, but did you know that Jesus he wanted to observe the Passover with his disciples? You know, the Last Supper? Have you ever heard the controversy? Was it on the 14th? Right? Did they have the Last Supper on the 13th in the evening, or did they have the Last Supper on the 14th in the evening?
Right.
Because Jesus specifically asked, I think it's in the Gospel of John, that he wanted to observe the Passover with his disciples. And if that's the case, he would have been with them on the evening of the 14th. But there's a whole school of thought that says he died on the evening of the 14th. But others say, well, no, he observed the Passover with his disciples, so he would have died on the 15th.
Right.
And so there's actually still an ongoing kind of
Yeah.
debate there. I mean, so it's and we knew this was going to happen. We were going to get all confused and not know, since we're so far removed and there's different theologies and schools of thought and all these things. But it's interesting to consider that, because
Yeah.
if the disciples themselves came out on the 15th, and the first fruits were offered unto the Lord on the 15th as well. It's interesting, possible, because that's when that's when those graves busted open.
It's funny you said
Mhm.
everybody's arguing about the date, and that's not even what matters. It's the event that what Christ fulfilled that matters. But the
Yeah.
devil gets us to focus on the temporal, not the eternal, you know?
That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's why we can't look for the day or hour, right? So we
Right.
just have to look at the season.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's super interesting. I mean,
It
and even the
makes sense.
flood, like if you,
Oh, go ahead, brother.
yeah, well, the symbolism of the flood is, and there's again, I'll just tell you quickly. So on the 10th, they would have gone in, and on the 17th, the door would have been closed, right? And then you read in Jubilees that there actually was a great earthquake on the 10th. And the people were like, trying to get into the ark, and it was like they were scared out of their mind. So that's in Jubilees, it reads a little bit differently than in Genesis. And on the seventh day, that's when the heavens and the fountain, everything broke, and the waters just came, and everything started. So, but that's on the 10th of the day of the second month to the 17th. So the 10th, if we're likened unto as to the days of Noah, where we'll be eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and building and all these things up until the day, right, that the floods came, we should be looking at really May 19th to May 26th, somewhere in there, depending on the calendars, right? We should be looking at that kind of time frame for the days of Noah this year. And then when you read in the Septuagint, it actually reads that on the 27th day of the second month, the door was closed. So the Septuagint, again, having different dates. And at first, I just neglected that. I'm like, whatever, I'm going with the 17th. And when I thought about it, I was like, wait a minute. Jesus Christ himself walked the earth for 40 days, right? And was ascended unto the Father, right, on the 27th day of the second month. And he said that I'll come back in the same way that I left.
Yeah.
During the days of Noah, on the day the door was closed and the floods came, right? So I'm like, so it actually does, like, so I'm just throwing out, you know what, let's just the entire month of May, just get your preps ready. We talk about a season, the window's like getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But so that was my study on the Passover. It really does relate to the priests.
That was good.
It's a